I now call upon the first speaker for the proposition to open the debate.
Hello everybody. As I'm sure you know, tonight we're debating the concept of positive or affirmative action. As our arguments will hopefully prove to you, positive action is a great step forward in combating the massive discrimination that so many face. Discrimination, as both teams agree, is acting based on a prejudice in a way that puts one group at a disadvantage. It is rampant in today's world, obvious by the present influence of racism in modern politics, the election or near election of racist leaders, attacks against minorities, and the clear lack of societal and industrial leaders belonging to certain minority groups. It's necessary that we attempt to implement as many measures as we can to reverse this discrimination, specifically the discriminatory way employers and universities look at applicants. I'd like to define what is the most critical term in this debate, the concept of positive action itself. What positive action is the use of encouragement, training, and recruitment of certain minorities who are disadvantaged because of their race, gender, sexuality, or other qualities. This helps to level the unequal playing field set up by the cis, straight, wealthy, white male majority. The minorities, having been historically given fewer opportunities than the white majority, will benefit from the extra consideration given to them in application processes. What positive action is not is automatically giving jobs or university places to people solely based on their minority status. And positive action, so far as this debate concerns, does not include the use of quota systems to determine compositions of workplaces or schools. Our first speaker, Mia, will address implicit bias, often unconscious prejudices that influence the way we act towards others. Implicit bias leads most people to act, whether or not they know it, in racist, sexist, and discriminatory ways. She'll explain that a colorblind society does not exist, and that we can't simply ignore race, gender, and other categories subject to discrimination by the majority. Our second speaker, Jess, will discuss the cycle of poverty and the way that many minorities placed historically in disadvantageous situations are unable to escape these positions. She'll show you how these situations further keep minorities from attaining higher paying jobs and leaving their poverty. Our third speaker, Jared, will address the past paternalistic nature of society and the way that it continues to dominate the roles that women and other minorities are able to take on, and the way that the white majority needs to address it. Our fourth and second to last speaker, Sarah, will show you how positive action is a long-term solution to discrimination, and that the benefits that it will create in the long run will help to decrease implicit bias and reverse discriminatory beliefs and actions, as well as provide a means for others in the future to attain further equality. Positive action, along with other steps that we must take to reduce discrimination, will lead to a society in which we will not need it. In order to change the problematic status quo, we need to confront our issues and not ignore them. Looking at this debate's resolution, it's important to note that in order to win this debate, my team must prove to you only that positive or affirmative action benefits historically disadvantaged groups. We recognize that positive action is one of many potential steps in the right direction, but it is a step and it is in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you to the opening speaker for the proposition. I now call upon the opening speaker for the opposition.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, the debate motion is one of positive action, and we, the opposition team, reject the proposition's motion, and throughout the course of tonight's debate, will prove to you why you should reject the motion too. First of all, why are we even debating this motion? What is the underlying problem that is so severe in our society that we are trying to address? This model proposed by the proposition team aims to fix the 59% gender pay gap across the globe, the third of the UK employees who have experienced racial discrimination in their workplaces. We acknowledge this massive problem of discrimination in our society. However, throughout this debate, we will explain how the proposition's model doesn't even begin to address, let alone fix, these major issues. Instead, simply encourages and exacerbates discrimination in our society. We will then go on to explain the necessity of our counter-model of organic change, and how change must come from us, the society, because that is where the problem lies. There are three major aspects to the proposition's motion that we will disprove tonight. First of which being the model of positive action. This essentially adds a minority identity as a factor for acceptance and recruitment in workplaces and university settings. This gives an advantage to one group, essentially ensuring an asymmetric protection. And this is the major essence of discrimination. And throughout history, we have realized that discrimination can't be fixed with discrimination. This will be further illustrated by the second speaker, who will examine the disadvantages of the historically discriminated groups through the look at the creamy layer problem, fraud victimization, and how this model will only window dress the problem. The second flaw in the proposition's motion is the aimed institutions of recruitment and acceptance areas of workplaces and universities. This is essentially only where discrimination is exposed and perpetuated. It has existed long before this time in our lives. This model treats the symptoms and not the causes of our innate discrimination in our society. This will further be explored by our third speaker, who will be looking at the economical aspect of this debate, with specific reference to the gender pay gap. Finally, these two ineffective aspects of the proposition's motion makes their aim of alleviating discrimination completely unachievable, as it's only window dressing the problem and it's writing into law the prejudicial categories into legislation, which gives reason for further discrimination. The fourth speaker of our team will continue to talk about this and how history has proven the model ineffective. He will use examples of paternalism, slavery, negative freedom, and tokenism. Once we have proved the complete flaws in the proposition's motion, we will propose our counter-model. The fifth speaker will talk to you about the effectiveness and necessity of not imposing legislation. She will explain how legislation can't change a society's perception and beliefs and ultimately prove why the proposition motions failed. She will introduce you to the idea of organic change and blind applications as an alternative solution to racism and discrimination in our society. Finally, our sixth speaker will summarise and conclude our debate and explain for the final time why you too should reject the motion.
Thank you to the opening speaker for the opposition. I now call upon the second speaker for the proposition.
Over time, we have divided our own species into subjective categories that shouldn't be considered important, such as race. Humans started using this concept to identify our friends and our foes. We placed ourselves into groups and placed those groups into hierarchies based on what was convenient for us and little else. Despite direct ignorance of racial issues, there is no denial that it has embedded itself into both society and the human mind. This is not to say everyone has bad intentions, but it is psychologically proven that stereotypes do affect our behaviors and actions in a subconscious manner, otherwise known as implicit bias. White, straight males maintained a monopoly over highly regarded positions throughout history, so naturally, we create an association between them, power, and capability. On the other hand, minority groups have been excluded from these positions, therefore associated with lower paying jobs and even violence. The violent nature some obtain is usually forced upon them due to the lack of choice they have in their disadvantaged environments. Even then, the media manages to portray the amount of black violence completely disproportional to the real statistics, whereas crimes committed by the white population is often ignored. Believe it or not, these outdated biases are still applicable to real-life situations, such as the major issue of police brutality in the US. In 2015, unarmed black people were killed at 5 times the rate of unarmed whites. These shocking statistics are not coincidental, but a consequence of implicit bias. In the life or death situation, a police officer would react based on their subconscious belief that there's a higher level of danger when a colored man is involved, rather than using logical conclusions.
Point, ma'am.
That's what happens. People rely on their instincts, but their instincts are racist, sexist, and discriminatory.
Point, ma'am.
Another important bias that comes into play is the perceived role of women in society, the idea that we're more suited for domestic purposes than in the working field. Again, while many people may not consciously promote limiting opportunities for women, historical, cultural, and religious beliefs have ingrained an image of a weaker sex.
On that point, ma'am.
Sorry. If there were two people with the exact same qualifications but of a different race, there is a higher chance of the white candidate receiving the position. As admissions offices tend to be filled with mainly white males, their implicit biases will lead them to hire from their own group. The only way to combat this issue is to expressly address it, to fight our subconscious mind with our conscious one. A colorblind society does not exist. Our implicit biases keep us from one. We cannot continue to ignore the issues that are presently occurring. Any reality suggesting that some groups are better than others need to be reversed, and positive action is one of the ways that we can achieve this. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the second speaker for the opposition.
Respected Chair, fellow proposition, and dear audience, today I will be speaking about the creamy layer problem, window dressing, and fraud victimization. First of all, I oblige you all to look around the room. One of your seatmates will be a minority group, and by minority group, I mean ethnic, gender, age, and sexual minorities. Now, with so many minority groups in the UK and the US of A, it's difficult to transcend them, outclass them, to put them in a shape. Giving them these so-called rights and privileges is just showing them that they are not up to the white, straight male standards. Institutions are hiring minorities only for skin color and gender, but not for merit and brilliance, covering up the fact that minorities have been made to feel inferior over and over the last generations, creating a facade and rather making minority groups feel inferior. It's window dressing at its best. Section 159 of the Equality Act 2010 permits, but does not require, an employer to take a protocol to protect a characteristic into consideration when deciding whom to recruit or promote, but this can only be done when both candidates are as qualified as each other. Even after laws, unemployment rate of BAME graduates is 5.9% compared to 2.3% of their white peers. There are a number of high-class high-class minorities, the powerful and wealthy minority groups that have established the way to the top. They are the creamy layer indeed. There have been instances where minority job candidate is employed over the dominant group candidate, or the other hand, where the employer rejects the minority. The employer in both cases could be exposed to claim unlawful discrimination in an employment tribunal by one of the rejected candidates who argues he or she is better qualified for the job. Also, as rightly said by Abigail Morris, the British Chambers of Commerce Employment Advisor, quote, allowing positive action in the recruitment is not going to make much difference, except lead to more tribunal claims. If discrimination claim succeeds, tribunal can order the employer to pay you compensation. Any money you've lost because of discrimination, any personal injury to your feelings such as stress and depression, and any aggregated damages, which is compensation, the tribunal can order employees to pay if they have behaved in malicious and insulting way. The tribunal can award between £500 for minor, less serious cases, up to £30,000 for the major, serious cases. The US Equal Employment Opportunity Commission statistics of 2013 indicated that there were 33,068 charges of racial discrimination filed for the year, representing 35.3% of the total complaints received for employment discrimination. No reasonable cause are filed for 24,175 cases. There were 78 cases filed. Most cases with reasonable cause were resolved through mediation, and a total of $112.7 million was collected by the employees for violations and excluding money received from lawsuits. This shows that there have been cases where minorities have been able to take unfair and undue advantage of the legislation in place, only and only for their own benefit. They have abused the law and committed fraud and perjury in a very subtle manner. Therefore, I'd like to conclude by saying that this is not the best possible way to tackle this particular problem. Instead, we offer a counter-organic model, which will be explained later by my successive speakers. Thank you.
Thank you to the second speaker, and I call upon the third speaker for the proposition.
From the slavery and the economic exploitation of minority groups, to denying these groups their socioeconomic, political and civil rights, to the allocation of resources in a way that still leaves impoverished communities on their own, minorities are continually subjected to an existence in which they are less likely to be able to access the same opportunities as white men. Not only is this disadvantage real and incredibly difficult to overcome as an individual, but the sociological outcome is that whole communities are likely to suffer with intergenerational impact. The cycle of poverty means that poverty, once started, is likely to continue unless outside intervention is made, and it continually puts struggling groups at a disadvantage in terms of universities and workplaces. Minority groups, from women to African Americans in the United States to immigrants, are more likely to start with less access to financial resources, education, or simply the luxury of time for training for skilled jobs. 25% of African Americans live in poverty, and around 10% of Americans live in poverty. These sorts of statistics show the severity of the odds set against these minority groups and their success. But putting bias aside, these disadvantages mean that regardless of intelligence, talent, or any other meritocratic qualities that might enable someone to be accepted, minority groups are statistically less likely to be successful, partially just because they're less likely to get to the recruitment stage. 15% of Texan college-age students are African American. Before positive action was banned, up to 7% of freshmen were black. Afterwards, this number went down to just under 3%, leading to a 12-point enrollment gap. This disparity is even larger for Hispanic young people. Because of these historical narratives and the odds set against minority groups, it is not enough for the opposition to simply say that treating them the same as everyone else creates equality. All it does is further entrench the disadvantage that already exists by allowing the same situation to continue under the pretense of equal treatment. Positive action, however, directly combats unequal opportunity for people who experience discrimination by encouraging, training, and perhaps recruiting members of society, not right now, who otherwise would not have the chance. Access to education or employment is one of the only factors that can break the poverty cycle by giving them access to financial security, and positive action directly corrects the disparity in how people can access it by giving them direct compensation. Ma'am, I'll take you in a minute. It makes sense, even mathematically. When people are disadvantaged because they are in unequal circumstances, we redress this directly by giving them access, yes.
How do you propose to make those people with protected characteristics suddenly see those that do not as equal, taking into account that racism is an ingrained historical issue?
So we think that positive action doesn't really take into account what racist employers think. On the contrary, we think it tries to override those sort of racist opinions in the first place. And we heard from Mia the sort of effects that can have in terms of perpetuating the ending the perpetuated stereotype that minority groups are not somehow able to take into account those jobs. So I'll talk about that more later. So the evidence shows that positive action has benefits for their entire communities because of the effects that educating anyone has for entire groups. Once some individuals, even if they are the most comparatively advantaged, gain more resources, they have an impact on the whole community. They can use their education to change how the community is being perceived and how they are being perceived by racist employers, and contribute to the normalization of minorities being involved in general in the workplace or universities. Positive action creates better outcomes for minority groups who struggle in an existing poor and an unjust system. Leaving the solution to organic change only makes the opposition complacent and willing to allow disadvantage, and would increase the inequality that they poorly attempt to stop.
Now we'll call upon the third speaker for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, the creamy layer problem and window dressing discussed by the second speaker are not the only problems of positive action. During this speech, I'll be exploring the economic aspect of the motion. Focusing on economic discrimination between men and women, the major issue that the positive action does not cover is the gender pay gap. But first, what causes the gender pay gap? According to the Global Gender Gap Index of 2016 from the World Economic Forum, the economic gap is caused by a number of factors, including 1, women being paid almost half of what men receive, 2, working on average 50 minutes a day longer, and 3, having a much slimmer chance of reaching senior roles. Therefore, although the positive action encourages to recruit more women, the existence of gender pay gap will still cause economic discrimination inside the workplaces between the two genders. The recruitment of more women only addresses the tip of the problem. To analyze this issue further, the 2016 report by the World Economic Forum found that economic disparity between men and women around the world was rising. It is stated the gaps between women and men on economic participation and political empowerment remain wide. Only 59% of the economic participation gap has been closed, and a continued reversal on several years of progress and the lowest value measured by the index since 2008. Specifically, in terms of the UK, its gender pay gap has refused to close for years. There was only a 1.1% change on the difference between average pay for male and female full-time employees over the 5 years, despite the introduction of the positive action. Adding on, an article from the Independent newspaper stated that the gender pay gap in Britain is shaped by racial inequality. Research from the Facet Society proves this point, with statistics showing that Black African women have seen virtually no progress since the 1990s in closing the gender pay gap with white British men, with a full-time pay gap of 21.4% in the 1990s and 19.6% today. Women from almost every minority ethnic group experience a pay gap with white British men, as well as experiencing a gender pay gap when compared with men of the same ethnicity. Statistics show that Pakistani and Bangladeshi women have the largest gender pay gap of all, with their full and part-time gender pay gap with the white British men standing at 26.2%. In conclusion, positive action encourages workplaces to hire more people from the minority groups, but the discrimination against historically disadvantaged groups will still continue due to the gender pay gap and racial wage gap. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the fourth speaker for the proposition. You ready?
Correcting the horrible cycle of poverty for the groups suffering from the most economic hardships also means correcting our historically based paternalistic attitudes towards women and other typically racial minorities. Paternalism is the idea that the white male appears as a superior figure to the minorities than the former. Paternalism is often used to justify repression of these other groups by the white male majority. It can lead to forcing women into domestic roles by claiming that they are too weak for the higher level positions, or keeping Asians from acquiring fancier white-collar jobs in societies under the excuse that preventing them from working higher-paid jobs is bad for their health. It's the same justification that many people used for slavery, using the excuse that black people were not physically capable of participating in society, that they needed guidance from whites, and that white people giving them work, not now, giving them work was keeping them out of trouble, even if that work was brutal, oppressive, and slavery. We have to accept the fact that paternalistic attitudes still exist in today's society. In so many areas of the world, women are kept from working and forced into domestic roles. Yes.
How does your model address intersectionality, which is the larger aspect of discrimination?
Sorry.
How does your model address intersectionality, which is the large aspect of your discrimination?
In so many areas of the world, women are kept from working and forced into domestic roles much as they were in the past. Racist paternalism will continue to exist, if not in the same extreme that led to racism. This paternalism needs to be cut off, and the ideologies and beliefs that promote those subtle discriminatory views. We need to do whatever we can to reverse the problems we created in the past. Because although we can't change the past, but we can easily change the future. There are many instances that highlight the negative historical impacts of paternalism. Evidence such as racially diverse work-like environments or universities in today's society. Positive action helps promote this atmosphere, reducing ignorance of culture the wealthy, white, straight, cisgender, male majority are not familiar with, or just ignorant or discriminatory of. If we can make a change by taking more positive action to correct these stereotypes, we can overcome our differences and work towards an equal society.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, my second and third speaker had told you about several flaws with sites proposition models that they refuse to acknowledge. But what makes this even worse is that the other team are undermining the urgency of another effective solution that will actually solve the problem, is organic changes. But before that, let's go back to the history before the American Civil War. In that time, only white Americans who had property could vote, and only white people could be the citizens of the United States of America. After the Civil War, U.S. government tried to enforce the rights of ex-slave in the south of U.S. through a process called Reconstruction. To be fair, Reconstruction doesn't actually help. It ended in 1866. And what was the outcomes? By 1819s, all the party was just white males, no one else. And they were really clear about they control everything, that there is no law against lynching will not pass. After the legislation, the positive action, violence towards black people had just increased. Individuals, groups, police, and even crowds of people could hurt or even kill black just because of their skin. African American, without the government, it just happened without any government interaction. According to the New York Times official website, black turnout in 2010 was 40.7%, only 1 percentage point above its average since 1966. What's the brightest example of solving the problem organically? It's the civil rights movement and Rosa Parks. The problem without legislation, it helped to get 5 federal laws, 2 amendments to the Constitution passed. It helped to change many white people's attitude towards the black people and the respect that they deserve. And nowadays, maybe you know, that many big companies and universities try to make people that just because of their protected characteristics. Maxim is using the principle of tokenism, where just like, hey, we're tolerant, come join us, we're good. I don't find it useful, and this and my background support our argument that changing and introducing new laws is just ridiculous. Why we should repeat the same mistake from century to century? My group promotes the way of the understanding and respect towards each other. Understanding, please, the right way.
What information?
The last minute is protected.
What's going on now? Just understand me right. I want to be chosen for university or offer for a job. Just because, not because of size of my eyes, not because color of my skin, not because of the person who I sleep with. I want to be chosen because not because what I am. I want to be chosen because of my personality, because who I am. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now call upon the 5th speaker for the opposition.
Not only does positive action have a positive economic impact, it also has a relevant and beneficial social impact with long-term benefits. One of the many ways positive action helps minorities is that it helps show them their potential. When there are more people like you working in a particular field, you are more likely to have a perception of yourself relating to that field. If a black student grows up in a mainly white school, seeing mostly white teachers and mostly learning about white history, and the capabilities of white men, they are more likely to associate higher levels, jobs, and position qualities with white people. Younger members of these minorities will think that it's normal for them to end up in the same lower-paying job that they've historically possessed because of oppression and won't necessarily be motivated to change or even believe that they can change the situation because these jobs and societal positions seem so unreachable and inaccessible, although they may not be. With more people in higher education, and universities, people from these minorities will have role models that they can identify with. People who will make them feel more confident about their own capabilities and prove to them that the white majority is not, in fact, smarter or more capable than they are. Not only will this change help the minorities, it will also change, no thank you, the majority's mental attitudes towards minorities, making equality an even more realistic future. As those currently holding most of the power will also begin to see so many other in powers, their own beliefs will change, recognizing the capability of said minorities, and they'll begin to act in accordance with their newfound understandings. Hopefully, their implicit biases will begin to diminish, and they'll ultimately hire more minorities and stop weighing whiteness and other qualities above them. At that point, positive action will no longer be necessary. How can we continue to move forward when those with power continue to see certain groups as inferior and incapable of holding higher level positions in society? And those without power have few, if any, supportive role models, no thank you, to further their ideas of what they are capable of and what they can achieve. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon the fifth speaker for the opposition.
Am I allowed to bring my clothes?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, ultimately, who wins the debate? So ultimately what we've agreed on is the problem of racial discrimination, that there is racial discrimination in our society that both teams agree to solve. On one side, you have side proposition, who seeks to implement legislation or positive action in our society. When down the bench, ladies and gentlemen, we've told you numerous times about the detrimental effects that they have bring. We see that team opposition accepts and acknowledges these short-term benefits, but we do not see why team proposition is willing to accept the long-term consequences of positive action that will exacerbate the problem of racial discrimination even further, which is the reason why we're having this debate in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. So my second speaker has told you and provided with you facts and statistics on how positive action significantly increases the differences between people of protected characteristics and those that do not. This is essentially social stratification, ladies and gentlemen. That is the root problem of why there is so much racial discrimination in our society in the first place, which side proposition has not attempted to respond yet. Ladies and gentlemen, our side does not see why the other side is willing to accept the creamy layer problem, asymmetric racism, and even more discrimination, so that more employers can say that they've reached a certain equality target. So here on side opposition, ladies and gentlemen, I'll be proposing a counter model from our side. So ultimately, today we propose the idea of organic change, where we allow the solution to be developed naturally in society, ladies and gentlemen. So basically, let's take a step back and let's take a look at what side proposition is suggesting. So what they're suggesting is that they're completely ignoring the fact that racism is an ingrained historical problem that cannot simply be solved by a rule or a legislation that is implemented. We see that this is similar to, for example, if you put two people in a room who hate each other and you expect them to simply just grow accustomed and have respect for each other when they've despised each other for many generations. We see that this is the point that even the third speaker has failed to respond to when I asked her POI in her speech. No, thank you. And ultimately, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we propose to seek organic change. So down the bench, for example, my fourth speaker has told you about the civil rights movement, no thank you, in the United States. So even if Reconstruction occurred, ladies and gentlemen, even if there was legislation to give slave rights, no thank you. This is even if there was legislation that gave slave rights, because there was the deep-rooted problem of the racial discrimination towards black people, this is why this was not passed, and this even exacerbated the amount of violence within the society, ladies and gentlemen. So this is why today we propose organic change through the civil rights movement, which will reduce social stratification, which is the main problem, which encourages people of protected characteristics to rise and defend their honor as a race, which allows those people who do not have these protected characteristics to actually see them as an equal and change their attitudes, which is the main problem. And secondly, we also would do this through blind applications, where information regarding their name, their gender, their race, etc. are omitted in order to allow for objectivity, ladies and gentlemen, in order to allow them to employ based on merit and not simply based on appearances, ladies and gentlemen. So ultimately, who should you vote for? Who wins this debate, ladies and gentlemen? If you stand for equality, if you stand for lack of inverse discrimination in society, then stand with side opposition. Thank you.
I now call upon the final speaker for this proposition.
Dear speakers from the other house, I have now had the pleasure to work and live beside these fantastic minds from all over the world. But ironically, 100 years ago, none of you from your house would have been allowed to speak in this very institution. Nonetheless, the business of making Britain and the rest of the world more inclusive, more compassionate, and more neighborly, a place where we can all be at home, a place where we can all live together equally, has still not yet been achieved. There's work for our generation to do. There's no denial of that. Work that should have been done ages ago. Work that has been brought up by situations that should have never occurred. This work needs to be done everywhere, especially in places such as Oxford, an institution that has been more than once been accused of being institutionally racist. And that's what this motion is all about. It's simply an acknowledgement of racism as a worldwide issue and an attempt to solve it and to create an equal society. There's a reason why we're discussing this here today, and there's a reason why positive action is gaining worldwide support all over the world, and there's a reason why more and more universities are adopting this policy. The second example, Hispanic and Black enrollment at the University of California, Berkeley and the University of California, Los Angeles dropped sharply after voters approved of a statewide ban on affirmative action. Those numbers have not been recovered, even as the state's Hispanic population has grown. With a 38% point drop in enrollment of Hispanic students and a 7% point drop of Black students of an overall 9% Black students in total, positive action proves itself to be an effective policy of intervention. Dear speakers, if by the end of what I think the impressive case of positive action is that we've presented, if you still think that the harsh reality that many ethnic minorities have to face is a lie, then we can change it by just sitting around and not doing anything and describe it as organic change, you really think you can solve anything, then you're lying to yourself. We still live in a racist society, and sadly there's no simple solution to a racist social construct which we have developed over centuries. We are not less racist than our ancestors, we're just simply better at hiding it. So ladies and gentlemen, I tell you, positive action is not the main solution, it's not the final solution, but it is a step, and it is in the right direction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Finally, I call upon the final speaker for the opposition.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm going to talk about natural things. What is a natural thing and which things are done naturally? We almost automatically press the send button on our smartphones that were made by no other people than slaves with colored skin. However, the acceptance or hired button when it comes to colored people and women that are applying to university or for a job is not pressed automatically. Why is being black in a society of white people not a socially acceptable thing? Why is hiring women not done automatically? Is it the government, is it the institutions, or is it us who generate inequality, racism, and discrimination? At the end of the day, it is still us who are the root cause of this problem due to the ingrained discrimination in our society. And there is no law that could change the perception of people. Actually, with this law, we achieve exactly what we wanted to prevent: inequality. How could that disappear if through this law the government would put a label on people with protected characteristics saying, "Don't touch me, I'm vulnerable"? This gets people with protected characteristics into a circle of vulnerability. And who wants this? This legislation treats the symptoms of racism, but not the root cause of it. The root cause of gender inequality, for example, lies in a simple observation everyone can make. Women were biologically designed in such a way that they are able to give birth to a child. If an employer is held back from hiring a young woman just because she could soon get pregnant, which would mean a loss of workforce and a job interview more, then there is no legislation that could change this mindset.
Even if this legislation allowed women to engage in jobs that were previously occupied by white male workers, it would at the same time indirectly force them to fulfill the characteristics of the honorary white male. In order to do so, shall we women avoid female duties, cut our hair shorter? Shall colored people try and get rid of the melanin in their cell layer? No, ladies and gentlemen. We have shown you that the gender pay gap won't narrow through this legislation. It doesn't even affect it. We have repeatedly shown you that this law would allow people to make an industry out of racism and sexism. We have demonstrated you that if we don't learn the lessons of the past, we jeopardize our future. We have wasted a lot of time thinking about legislation, whereas, ladies and gentlemen, what we really need is to change the mindset of people. You might accuse us of having a too naive understanding of the world, but that's how dreams come true. And our dream is that people will one day live in a society where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, gender, and age, but by the content of their heart. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of our speakers. We will shortly commence a floor debate lasting around 20 minutes. We'll be taking questions from either side and also from the audience. But before that, I'd like to introduce the chair of tonight's debate, who will talk us through the next stages. Nadeem Ahmad Al-Hassani has run the debate elective on the Oxford Summer Academy since its infancy and comes to us with an outstanding pedigree, having taught in not one but 3 Oxford colleges, St Cross, Hartford and Mansfield. He gained his BA in Arabic at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, followed by completion of an MPhil in Arabic and Philosophy, and finally work on a DPhil of Philosophy of Mind here at Oxford. It gives me a great pleasure to hand over to Nadeem Ahmad.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Thank you very much indeed, Harry, for your brilliant introduction. I'd like to welcome you all for I think probably the main part of the evening, which is the rebuttal stage, I suppose. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting topic to debate. It is inequality and discrimination are features of our society, I think. But the question that's being posed by the opposition is that is that something that ought to be rectified using legislation? In other words, if we accept that there is inequality and discrimination, ought it to be the case that legislation is the way forward? Can laws really affect a change? So, in a sense, I'm trying to get you to work out what the philosophical, political, and economic implications are of these sorts of questions. I can say one thing: both teams have worked extremely hard in relation to the pursuit of the arguments that you're seeing here. Finding arguments is not easy. It's not easy to locate arguments, that some of which are political, some of which are economic, philosophical. It requires a lot of work, and I can say one thing: I've not been more impressed than with the groups that are with us today in relation to the amount of work that they've put in, the rigor that they've applied, the logical thinking that they've used. In a sense, it's been a real roller coaster ride for both teams, and so I'd like to congratulate both of them. If you could give them all a So one thing I should get you to think about is whether or not you're persuaded by arguments, because both teams are going to present arguments that are, in a sense, rationally persuasive. Some of them will be emotional, some of them will be irrational, but in a sense, the task is to try and work out which arguments you think ultimately are rationally persuasive for you, because we are going to ask members of the audience to vote, and I'm not sure, are we going to select a
best speaker?
A best speaker, there you go. So we're going to decide at the end of the day who we think is the best speaker overall. Okay, so that's the general format. So it's going to be 20 minutes for a general round of rebuttals, followed by, after which we will ask both teams to leave the hall, and afterwards we will ask members of the audience to vote on the matter. All right, so that's the general format. So audience members, please start to think of questions which you feel you could ask in a very meaningful way, and we hope we can vote on the matter at the end of that.
So start with rebuttals from either team.
Yes, so if we start, I suppose we can start maybe with the proposition, if you would like to. Start, you can come up to the podium and ask questions.
Stand where you are.
Or stand where you
2
are.
minutes maybe to discuss real quick.
Yes, you give you a...
We'll stop the recording for a couple of minutes.
Okay, just for a couple of minutes. Let's just